James squinted, his eyes scanning the bustling crowd of park-goers for a familiar figure. He was perched on a bench, pretending to skim through the morning paper, but his focus was entirely on a woman who had just walked past him. It was her, Catherine. 15 years had slipped by, yet he'd recognize her anywhere. The same gentle features, the same graceful stride, the same warmth in her eyes. But something had shifted in her presence. There was a newfound confidence, a quiet strength he didn't recall from their shared past. And then there were the children. 3 boys tagging along with her, 2 older ones, maybe around 14, and a little one, about 5, clutching her hand. James froze, as if struck by a bolt of lightning. Catherine with kids? It didn't add up. A flood of memories crashed over him like a chilling wave. Their marriage, the endless struggle to start a family, the doctor's grim diagnosis of infertility, his despair, her silent tears, and ultimately, the divorce. Painful, but at the time, seemingly unavoidable. Now here she was, strolling through the park, surrounded by children. Her children? Or... James felt his stomach churn. A storm of emotions swirled within him. Betrayal, confusion, a sense of being cheated. How could she have kept something like this from him? Or was he jumping to conclusions? Maybe they were her sister's kids, or a friend's? Yet deep down, a nagging instinct told him otherwise. There was too much tenderness, too much love in the way she gazed at them. James ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. He needed to think straight, to pull himself together. He resolved to approach this carefully. He had to find out more, to understand the truth. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the city was cloaked in twilight. A profound loneliness settled over James, heavier than ever. It hit him like a ton of bricks. All these years, he'd been chasing a hollow dream, climbing the corporate ladder, chasing accolades, seeking validation. But none of it mattered. Not without a family, not without children, not without love. Memories surged again, pulling him back to the days when his love for Catherine consumed him entirely. They'd met at an architecture expo. She, a young doctor brimming with energy and compassion. He, an aspiring architect with grand visions of shaping the world through his designs. Their shared zest for life and desire to build something enduring, something that would outlast them, had drawn them together. Soon after, they tied the knot. Their cozy apartment, with its tall ceilings and wide windows overlooking a quiet suburban street, became their sanctuary, a safe haven from the chaos of the outside world. They'd sit on their worn-out couch after long days, sharing takeout pizza or homemade mac and cheese, dreaming of the pitter-patter of tiny feet and laughter echoing through the rooms. They longed for a child, for a little one to chase around the backyard during summer barbecues. But as months turned into years, the pregnancy tests remained stubbornly negative. The endless cycle of doctor visits began. Blood tests, ultrasounds, consultations. Hope gave way to heartbreak, faith to frustration. The diagnosis landed like a hammer blow. Infertility. The word shattered their dreams, crumbling their fragile hopes like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. James could still picture Catherine crying into her pillow at night, muffling her sobs so he wouldn't hear. He'd wrap his arms around her, trying to offer comfort, but he felt utterly powerless. His own pain was different. He yearned for a legacy, for a child to look up at him with wide, adoring eyes and call him Dad. The idea of IVF emerged like a lifeline in their sea of despair. They both jumped at the chance, clinging to any shred of possibility. The fertility clinic, with its cold, sterile hallways and the faint scent of antiseptic, became a second home, a place where they pinned their last hopes, Even as they navigated the quiet tension of waiting for results, the unspoken fear of another disappointment, and the occasional sharp exchange when nerves frayed, like when James snapped over a forgotten appointment, only to apologize with a sheepish, "Hey, babe, I didn't mean it. I'm just stressed." James and Catherine had endured a grueling journey through hormone treatments, invasive medical procedures, and countless moments of anxiety mixed with fleeting hope. Each failed attempt felt like a punch to the gut, every negative result carving deeper cracks into the foundation of their marriage, threatening to shatter what they had built together over the years. The emotional toll was immense, leaving them both drained and questioning everything they thought they knew about their future. One rainy evening, as they sat in their quiet living room with the faint hum of a football game on the TV in the background, Catherine broke the heavy silence. Her eyes, red from crying, searched James's face for some kind of solace. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "I'm tired of putting us through this pain. Maybe this just isn't meant for us. Maybe we're destined to just be the two of us, and that's okay, isn't it?" Her words hung in the air like a dense fog, pleading for him to agree, to ease her burden. James sat there, wordless, his gaze fixed on the flickering screen, though he wasn't really watching. The constant stress, the sleepless nights spent worrying, and the gnawing guilt of not being able to give her what she so desperately wanted, it had worn him down to the bone. Deep inside, a decision he'd been avoiding for months was taking shape, one he dreaded voicing aloud for fear of what it would mean for them. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit, as if trying to warm himself against the chill of his own thoughts. Finally, he turned to her, his voice low and strained. "I can't imagine a life without kids," he admitted, unable to meet her eyes. "I've always wanted to be a dad. I don't think I can be truly happy without that dream coming true." His confession was raw, cutting through the silence like a knife, exposing the rift that had been growing between them. Catherine didn't respond right away. She just stared at him, her expression a mix of heartbreak and quiet resignation, as if she'd known this moment was coming. In her eyes, James saw both her pain and a reluctant understanding. Divorce became the unspoken inevitability. James insisted on moving forward with it, feeling that staying together would only break him further. He didn't blame Catherine, not really. He pointed fingers at fate, at the doctors who couldn't help them, and most of all, at himself for not being enough. Their separation was civil, almost eerily calm, with no shouting matches or bitter accusations. They had loved each other once, deeply, but they couldn't overcome a hurdle that proved too high, too unyielding. After the divorce, James threw himself into his work with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. As a contractor, he poured his energy into constructing homes, sprawling shopping complexes, and sleek office towers across the city. Yet none of these projects could fill the aching void in his chest. He dated here and there, grabbing coffee or burgers at local diners with women he met through friends, but no one came close to replacing Catherine. Over time, he began to realize he might have made a terrible mistake, but the chance to fix it had slipped through his fingers like sand. Shaking off the weight of those memories, James snapped back to the present, determined to seek answers. His first step was reaching out to the few mutual friends he and Catherine still shared after all these years. He tread carefully, asking casual questions over quick chats at the local diner, hoping not to raise eyebrows or reveal how much he was still hung up on his ex-wife's life. "Hey, how's Catherine doing these days?" he asked Sarah, a former co-worker of Catherine's from the hospital, as they sat over greasy plates of fries and milkshakes at a nearby joint. His tone was light, as if he was just making small talk. Sarah grinned, wiping ketchup off her fingers with a napkin. "Oh, Catherine's a rock star," she said with a chuckle. "She's working her tail off, pulling double shifts, but somehow she's always got a smile on her face. Her kids are amazing. Each one's got their own personality, but they're all so bright. She never complains, just handles everything on her own, like a total champ." James felt Sarah's words tighten around his heart like a vice. That phrase, "on her own," hit him like a subtle jab, a reminder of what he'd walked away from. Trying to keep his cool, he sipped his shake and casually probed further. "So, has she, tied the knot again or anything?" Sarah looked surprised, raising an eyebrow. "Nah, not at all," she replied, shaking her head. "She's all about her kids. I haven't seen any guy around her, to be honest. She's just doing it all solo." That piece of news sparked a flicker of hope in James. If Catherine hadn't remarried, could it be possible that he was the father of her children? But how? The questions sliced through his mind, sharp and unanswered, leaving him restless. Next on his list was Mr. Michael, a longtime family friend who had always treated James and Catherine like his own kin. James knew the old man wouldn't dodge the tough questions or sugarcoat the truth, even if it stung. "Hey, Mr. Michael, it's been a while," James started, his voice betraying a slight quiver as he gripped his phone a little too tightly. "How have you been holding up?" "Good to hear from you, James," Mr. Michael replied warmly, his gravelly voice a comforting echo of better days. "I'm doing all right, just keeping busy with the garden and all. How about you? You've been off the radar for a bit, haven't you?" After a brief exchange of pleasantries, swapping stories about the latest neighborhood gossip and the best spots for a Sunday barbecue, James mustered the courage to get to the point. "Mr. Michael, there's something I've been meaning to ask?" His voice trailed off, unsure of how to frame the question that had been eating at him for weeks. "Hey, how's Catherine doing? And how's she managing with the kids?" There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. James held his breath, waiting for a response, his fingers tightening around the phone. Finally, Mr. Michael's voice broke through, calm but weighted with unspoken thoughts. "She's doing great, really. Catherine's a tough one. Raising 3 kids on her own isn't a walk in the park, but she's handling it like a champ." James stammered, his mind racing to process the words. I don't get it. How could this even happen? We were told we couldn't have kids." Mr. Michael let out a slow sigh, his tone carrying a hint of weary wisdom. "Life's a complicated mess, James. Catherine's stronger than most. She's done everything in her power to make it work." A vague, unsettling suspicion began to form in James's mind. Did she adopt them? Could that be it? There was a brief hesitation from Mr. Michael before he clarified. "Well, let's just say it wasn't adoption. The kids carry her last name." That hit James like a punch to the gut. Catherine's last name? So she gave birth to them herself? But how could that be? Had medical science advanced so far that she overcame their shared infertility? Or a wild, almost unthinkable idea flashed through his mind. IVF? A clinic? Maybe even frozen samples from back when they'd made those promises to each other, sitting over late-night cups of coffee and dreaming of a future that seemed impossible. Background music fades in. Desperate for clarity, James decided to turn to his closest friend, Ethan, who had stood by him through thick and thin, even during the messy divorce. Ethan had always been the more empathetic and insightful of the two, often seeing things James couldn't. They met up at a cozy little diner downtown, the kind of place where the smell of greasy burgers and apple pie lingered in the air, and the waitress called everyone Han with a tired but genuine smile. James didn't waste any time, diving straight into the story of his unexpected run-in with Catherine, the mention of her kids, and the nagging doubts swirling in his head. Ethan leaned back in the booth, sipping his black coffee, and let out a long sigh. Look, man, I've always thought you made a huge mistake walking away from Catherine. She loved you more than you probably deserved. James nodded, guilt creeping into his voice. I know, but back then, I convinced myself I couldn't be happy without a family of my own. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his tone sharp but not unkind. And are you happy now, buddy? James didn't answer, his silence louder than words. Ethan pressed on, his voice softer but firm. Listen, I don't have all the pieces of this puzzle, but I'll tell you this much. Things aren't as black and white as you think. Catherine's been through hell and back. Those kids are her world, her happiness. Don't go messing that up for her. James shook his head, frustration bubbling up. I'm not trying to ruin anything, Ethan. I just need to know the truth. Don't I deserve that much? Ethan gave him a long, searching look, the kind that cut through excuses. Deserve? What right do you think you've got, man? You walked away from her, from any chance of being by her side. You blew it. Maybe it's time to just let her live her life in peace. James's voice dropped to a whisper, heavy with unresolved pain. I can't, Ethan. I can't just let this go. There's too much at stake here. Ethan sighed again, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when he was exasperated. Fine, I've said my piece. But just remember, sometimes the truth hurts more than you expect, and it doesn't always set you free. After that conversation, James felt even more lost than before. He knew deep down that he'd missed his shot, but walking away from this mystery wasn't an option. He needed answers, even if they tore him apart. The only way forward was to talk to Catherine herself. He hesitated for what felt like hours before finally dialing her number, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. Hello? Her familiar voice came through, tentative but clear. Catherine, it's James, he said, his mouth dry as sandpaper. We need to talk. There was a long pause on the line, and for a moment he thought she'd hang up. But then, quietly, she replied, Okay. They agreed to meet in 2 days at a quiet little coffee shop on the edge of town, the kind of place where locals grabbed their morning latte and grumbled about traffic. James hung up the phone, closed his eyes, and let out a shaky breath. Those 2 days dragged on like an eternity, each hour filled with restless thoughts and the faint, lingering smell of diner coffee still on his jacket. James couldn't eat a bite or catch a wink of sleep. His mind was consumed by the upcoming meeting, endlessly replaying potential conversations and outcomes. He trusted that Catherine wouldn't lie to him, yet he also braced himself for the possibility that the truth might cut deeper than he could bear. On the day of their meeting, he arrived at the cozy little diner early, snagging a table by the window with a view of the bustling street outside. He fidgeted nervously, tapping his fingers on the checkered tablecloth, his thoughts racing. What would he say to her? How would she react to his probing questions? And most importantly, what would he do if his worst fears were confirmed? When Catherine finally walked in, he almost didn't recognize her. She looked worn out, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders, though her eyes burned with a fierce determination. She took the seat across from him without a word, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made his stomach churn. James cleared his throat, trying to shake off the nerves that threatened to choke him. Hey, thanks for coming, he started, his voice rough around the edges. I needed to talk about the kids. Catherine just stared at him, her eyes not filled with anger, but a deep, lingering sadness. I figured as much, she replied softly. I've been waiting for you to ask. She fell silent, giving him space to continue, though the air between them felt heavy. Look, Catherine, I need to know, he pressed, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you end up with kids? Her face hardened, and she turned her gaze out the window, watching folks rush by with their takeout coffees and grocery bags. That's not your concern, James, she said curtly. Not my concern, he snapped, his frustration boiling over. After everything we've been through, after all those years, don't you think I deserve to know? Deserve? She shot back with a bitter laugh, her tone laced with pain. You gave up any claim to that when you walked away, when you decided your priorities were elsewhere. James went quiet, her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't wrong, and he couldn't argue with her. Still, that didn't dull his aching need for answers. Please, Catherine, he pleaded, his voice softer now. Don't shut me out. She let out a long, heavy sigh before finally speaking. After the divorce, I couldn't just give up. I couldn't let go of our dream of having a family. I knew we still had frozen embryos at the clinic. James froze. He remembered those grueling treatments, the roller coaster of hope and heartbreak, the paperwork they'd signed together to store the embryos just in case they wanted to try again. He'd assumed all of that was over after they split. You went ahead with it without me? He asked, disbelief coloring his tone. Yes, James, I did, she admitted, her voice steady but tinged with defiance. I knew it might seem selfish, even crazy, but I couldn't walk away from it. I felt I owed it to myself to try. And? He pressed, holding his breath as if the world hung on her next words. The first few rounds failed, she said, a shadow of sorrow crossing her face. I was devastated, ready to throw in the towel. But then a miracle happened. I got pregnant with twins. James felt the diner spin around him, the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation fading into a blur. Twins, his boys, the ones he'd seen running around at the local park during a Saturday barbecue. They were his. Twins, he whispered, the word barely audible. That's unbelievable. It was unbelievably hard, Catherine cut in, her tone sharp but weary. Alone, without any help, without you. But I made it through. They're my whole world now. And the youngest? He asked, leaning forward. He's what, about 5? Catherine looked away, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. That's a different story, James, she said quietly. What kind of story? He pushed, desperation creeping into his voice. What happened? She didn't answer, and he could tell she wasn't ready to share. A wave of frustration washed over him. He needed to know everything, to piece together the life he'd missed. Come on, Catherine, please, he begged again. Don't leave me in the dark. She took another deep breath, as if steeling herself before finally speaking. I was working at the maternity ward back then, she began, her voice low, almost lost in the din of the diner where the waitress was calling out orders for pancakes and bacon. Late one chilly evening, a newborn boy was left in our care. His biological mother had made the heartbreaking decision to give him up. James sat there, holding his breath, completely absorbed in the story unfolding before him. Catherine, with a quiet strength in her voice, shared her journey. I couldn't bear the thought of him being alone in this world, she said softly. I couldn't let him grow up in an orphanage without a family to call his own. I knew deep down that I could give him the love and warmth he deserved. So, I took the steps to become his legal guardian, and eventually, I adopted him as my own. James was utterly stunned by her words. Catherine had shown a resilience and compassion he had never fully appreciated before. Not only had she fulfilled her lifelong dream of becoming a mother, but she had also saved a vulnerable child from a life of uncertainty. Does he know you're not his birth mom? James asked hesitantly, still processing the enormity of what he'd heard. Yes, Catherine replied with a gentle nod. He knows the truth. We've always been open with him about it. He's just as much a part of our family as the twins, and we love him with all our hearts. James sat in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. A wave of regret washed over him. He had missed so much, walked away from a family that could have been his. Now, all he could do was look at their lives from the outside, like a stranger peering through a window. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his voice laced with hurt. "Why did you keep this from me all these years?" Catherine's gaze hardened slightly as she responded. "Because you left, James. You made your choice back then. I didn't want to barge into your life and turn everything upside down. I was afraid you'd try to take the kids away. I was scared you'd hurt me all over again." James opened his mouth to protest. "I would never." But the words faltered. He couldn't make promises now. Truthfully, he didn't even know what he would have done if he'd known sooner. "I don't blame you, James," Catherine added, her tone heavy with exhaustion. "But I can't change what's already happened." James felt a flicker of desperation as he asked, "What do I need to do? What can I do to show you I've changed, to make you trust me again?" Catherine studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something. Sincerity, perhaps. "Only time will tell, James," she said at last. "Time will tell." With that, she stood up from the small diner table, where they'd been sipping coffee amidst the hum of late-night chatter and the clinking of dishes. James knew the conversation was over. He wanted to stop her, to say something meaningful, anything to bridge the gap between them, but the words caught in his throat. All he could do was watch her walk away, fully aware that this moment could shape his future. He stayed behind, slumped in the booth, feeling hollow and lost. The secret was out, but instead of relief, a heavy burden settled on his chest. Determined to make a start, James learned from Catherine that one of the twins, Daniel, had a big soccer game the next day at the local community field. He decided to show up and cheer him on, hoping to take a small step forward. Standing on the bleachers, bundled in a jacket against the crisp fall air, James felt out of place among the other parents, who were chatting over thermoses of hot cocoa and swapping stories about their kids' latest antics. Curious glances came his way. After all, small-town folks notice a new face, but he tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the game. Daniel was impressive on the field, darting past opponents with speed and precision, scoring goals with a confidence that made James's chest swell with pride, even though he knew he had no right to feel that way. After the game, as kids munched on post-match snacks like peanut butter sandwiches and apple slices, James approached Daniel, who was sweaty but beaming with victory. "Hey there," James said, his voice unsteady with nerves. "I just wanted to say you played an amazing game out there." Daniel looked up, a puzzled expression on his face. "Thanks," he replied simply, wiping his brow. I'm a friend of your mom's," James added, feeling foolish as the words tumbled out. "Oh, okay," Daniel said with a shrug, and that was the end of it. The exchange was brief, almost awkward, but James refused to give up. He knew rebuilding trust would take patience. Over the next few weeks, James made it a point to visit Catherine and the boys more often. He'd swing by on weekends, sometimes bringing a box of donuts from the local bakery, a classic American treat that often sparked a playful squabble among the kids over who got the chocolate-glazed one. Other times, he'd linger after dropping off a few things, hoping for a casual chat over a cup of coffee. Though Catherine often kept her distance, her responses polite but guarded. Once, during a visit, he overheard the twins bickering over whose turn it was to mow the lawn. A typical suburban chore that turned into a mini argument about fairness. "Hey guys, let's flip a coin for it," James suggested, trying to mediate, only to earn a skeptical look from Daniel and a smirk from the other twin. Still, he kept showing up, knowing that every small gesture, every moment spent together, was a chance to slowly mend what had been broken. James had been dedicating himself to helping the boys with their schoolwork, spending hours poring over math problems and history essays at the kitchen table. He'd also been playing with young Andrew, zooming toy cars across the living room rug, and taking the twins to the latest superhero movies at the local cinema on weekends. His goal wasn't to force himself into the role of a father, but to simply be a supportive friend, someone they could rely on without feeling pressured. Over time, the twins started warming up to him. The wary glances and guarded expressions softened, and occasionally, they'd even flash him a shy grin over a shared joke. Little Andrew, the youngest, began calling him by his first name, tugging at his sleeve with eager requests to read bedtime stories like "Good Night, Moon." Catherine watched this slow transformation with a cautious hope in her heart. She could see James was genuinely putting in the effort, but deep down, she still harbored doubts about whether this change in him was truly permanent or just a fleeting phase. One chilly evening, as James was shrugging on his coat to head out after a long day, Catherine stopped him at the door with a soft touch on his arm. "Hey, thanks," she murmured, her voice warm but restrained. "Thanks for everything you're doing for them." She stepped closer, her breath visible in the cool air, and planted a gentle kiss on his cheek. It was a quiet, fleeting gesture, but it sparked a flicker of hope in James's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Yet, despite all his efforts, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling of a vast chasm between him and his sons. They accepted him as a buddy, someone to hang out with over burgers and fries at the diner, but not as a dad. That barrier felt insurmountable, like a wall he couldn't scale no matter how hard he tried. One afternoon, while they were kicking a soccer ball around in the backyard, Daniel caught him off guard with a sudden question. "Hey, James, did you ever want to have kids of your own?" The words hit like a curveball, leaving James momentarily speechless as he fumbled for a response. "Yeah, I did," he finally admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. "I've always dreamed of having a family." Daniel tilted his head, curious. "Then why don't you have any?" James fell silent, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. How could he explain to Daniel that he was his father, but had walked away from that role years ago in a decision he now regretted every single day? "It's a long story, kiddo," he said at last, forcing a small smile. "Maybe I'll tell you about it someday." Daniel gave him a skeptical look, his brows furrowing, but didn't push further. That night, as James sat alone with a cup of coffee, staring out at the suburban street lined with picket fences, he realized he couldn't keep dodging the truth. He needed to come clean to his sons, to lay bare his past, his mistakes, and the deep remorse that haunted him. He had to give them the chance to decide if they wanted him in their lives as more than just a friend. Sharing his thoughts with Catherine over a late-night slice of apple pie, he found her in agreement, her eyes reflecting both concern and resolve. The next day, James gathered the twins in the cozy living room, the faint hum of a neighbor's lawnmower drifting through the open window. He told them everything, how he'd loved Catherine with all his heart, how he'd once dreamed of raising a family, and how he'd made the painful choice that they couldn't have kids together back then. He spoke of the divorce, the years of regret, and the fateful day he'd bumped into them at the park and learned the truth about their connection. The twins listened in stunned silence, their eyes wide with a mix of shock and confusion. When James finished, a heavy quiet settled over the room, broken only by the distant bark of a dog. Elijah was the first to speak, his voice hesitant. "So, you're saying you're our dad?" James nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, I am." Elijah and Daniel exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. "I don't even know what to think right now," Daniel admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "Same here," Elijah echoed, his tone flat. James understood their confusion all too well. He hadn't expected an immediate embrace or forgiveness. "You don't have to say anything just yet," he assured them, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Take your time. Think about what you want to do next." The twins nodded slowly and left the room, their footsteps fading down the hallway. James felt utterly drained, as if he'd poured every ounce of himself into those words. He'd done all he could. Now the ball was in their court. Days passed, each one stretching out with agonizing slowness. James kept his distance, knowing they needed space to process everything. He busied himself with mundane tasks, mowing the lawn, grabbing a coffee at the local diner. But his mind never strayed far from them. Then, one evening, Catherine showed up at his door, her face a mix of nerves and encouragement. "They're ready to talk to you," she said simply. James's heart skipped a beat as he followed her back to the house, the familiar scent of grilled cheese sandwiches lingering in the air from dinner. The twins were waiting in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch. "We've been thinking a lot," Elijah started, his voice more confident now. "And we've decided we want to get to know you better." "We're not sure how this will work out," Daniel added, shrugging slightly. "But we're willing to give it a shot." James felt tears prick at his eyes, a wave of relief and gratitude washing over him as he took in their words, knowing this was just the first step on a long road ahead. James could hardly wrap his mind around the incredible turn of events that had brought him to this moment. A wave of gratitude washed over him as he looked into the eyes of those who had given him this unexpected opportunity. "Thanks, guys," he said, with a slight tremble in his voice. "I can't tell you how much this means to me. I swear I won't let you down. Not this time." He took a few steps toward his two boys, pulling them into a tight, heartfelt embrace. These were his sons, his flesh and blood, the very reason he got up every morning, and he was determined to stand by them no matter the odds. As they stood there, the familiar scent of a homemade apple pie baking in the oven filled the air, a comforting reminder of Sunday afternoons spent together as a family, even if those days felt like a distant memory. He couldn't help but wonder if he could truly earn this second chance to be the father his boys deserved. Would James find a way to mend the broken pieces of his past and rebuild a connection with Catherine, whose sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude always kept him on his toes? He remembered the little everyday squabbles they used to have, like the time he forgot to pick up milk on his way home, only to be met with her playful jab. "Hey, mister, am I supposed to make coffee with water now?" Her sarcasm had always carried a warmth that made him smile, even in tough times. Now, as he stood with his sons, he knew this was merely the first step on a long road, a journey toward redemption, healing, and perhaps, if he dared to hope, a slice of happiness waiting at the end. He could already picture the small victories ahead, like sharing burgers and fries at the local diner after a Little League game, cheering louder than anyone else in the stands, or navigating the inevitable teenage eye rolls with a patient grin. This path wouldn't be easy, but for his family, he was ready to face every challenge head-on.